Mountain biking can be an amazing sport, maybe more so in the summer, but hopefully with these top tips and hacks, you'll enjoy mountain biking in the winter almost as much as you do in the summer. We're going to run through these tips and tricks in order of effectiveness. Well, rough effectiveness. I mean, you might find changing tubeless tyres a bit faffy, but it makes a massive difference. And talking about tyres, that's where we're going to start, is tyres. Tyres. We could probably do a whole show just on tyres. Actually, I feel like there's probably a link below to lots of great videos that we've already done on tyres. But tyres can make such a big difference to your ride, especially in winter. Why? Well, it's one of your contact points, like grips and saddles. This is the bit of your bike that's actually in contact with the ground, so changing it can make a radical difference to your ride. Depending on where you ride, and I'm thinking muddier conditions because it's winter, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, realistically, changing to something with a more open tread pattern, like this motor, is going to make a big difference over something with a slightly tighter tread pattern, like this Mazda. And we're talking about Vittoria just because that's what we use here in the GMBN workshop a lot, so we've got good experience. But the rules that apply to the kind of more open treaded tyres apply across lots of different tyre brands. So you've got these relatively chopped down blocks, but they've got really sharp edges, so they do bite into the terrain really well. They've also got lots of space between them, and that's key because it means it clears mud really well. And those features are available on Moto and lots of other sort of gravity trail tyres, and they're perfect for the winter. So it's not just for the gravity fiends that changing tyres is really important. So again, this is Vittoria, this is the Mezcal, and it's an awesome tyre. We've got a really nice fast rolling centre strip, lots of close blocks and edges which grip really well in the right conditions, which are more to the drier side of a winter. So even for the horizon hunters, switching to something like the Barzo, which you can see, again, it's got lots of centre knobs in the middle, so it'll roll really quickly. But again, a bit like the motor, it's got lots more space for trail detritus, mud, crud to get chucked out, and also it's got more space to bite into the terrain. So switching to something like this, if you're still into your horizon hunting during the winter, is a great move. So whilst this is the motor and this is the Mazda, it's a really good example of how, well, Vittoria have been quite smart about it, but you need to be smart about it too. So one thing that these more open treaded pattern tyres can do, and the conditions where there's lots of mud, lots of crud, it can just stick to your tyres. And even with the open tread pattern of a motor, at some point you're going to get bogged up. And that means, depending on what frame you've got, you might run clearance issues. So it's a smart idea to, when you decide to switch tyres, if you're running a 2.4 and you've just got enough room in the summer, to switch to something like a 235 or maybe smaller on these open treaded tyres. They do pick up a lot more mud. So yeah, you've got to have check your frame clearance. Those same rule applies to the Horizon Hunter cross-country folks. So you can get a Barzo just here, or similar tyres with the open tread pattern that are slightly slimmer, just to give you a bit more mud clearance. So when we've talked about tyres, we've talked about tread pattern already. We've already talked about maybe reducing carcass size. The other key thing is this. Okay, it's not a tyre, it's a pressure gauge. This one's a really nice one from Toe Peak. It's the shuttle, so you can do your rear suspension or front suspension with it too. But it's critical that if you're going to change tyre size, so you're going down from maybe a 2.4 to a 2.5, that you play with pressure. And that's because these spikier knob shapes can bite in really well into soft terrain, but sometimes on harder surfaces, you've got the mechanical grip, but sometimes they're going to struggle to bite into the hard surfaces. Whereas, Mezcal, it's got all these working edges. So on the harder surfaces, it's got loads of working edges to grip. The Barzo doesn't have as many, it clears much better. So it's a compromise, but in the right direction. So dropping tyre pressure can help a lot. When you talk about tyre pressure, the next sort of, maybe it's elephant in the room or insert in the tyre maybe is a better example, is inserts. So these are the Vittoria ones. These ones are the jazzy, super light ones for cross-country. But they do another version of an airline which is really adjustable from 275 to even 26 or even smaller, all the way up to 29. So some people like inserts. Effectively, they're a closed cell foam insert that sits inside your tyre when you're running tubeless. The advantage is that it can protect your tyre, it can protect your rim, and it can protect your ride overall. So the drawbacks is that it feels a bit different. Another drawback is some people overthink it and think that it feels really, really different. But I'll put this to them, and obviously do comment below if you do like them or don't like them. My big take home for inserts, especially for winter, is if you've given your last inner tube to Steve, you've run out of plugs or worms, and you get another flat, well, how are you going to get back? The grass stuffing thing is a toughie, and if it's getting dark and it's wet and it's cold and it's grim, well, if you've got a tyre insert in there, you'd just be able to ride home. Okay, not at full chat, not at full pace, but you'd still be able to get home or get to the car park and not right off a wheel. So, A, you can save a wheel, and B, you might be able to save a winter ride if you've played a bit too tightly on pressure and not got your pressures quite right and you've had a flat. Inserts can really help you in winter. This one might be a bit controversial, especially for the kind of those that really care about the aesthetics. So this one's Fenders or mudguards. Now for me, they're amazing. Okay, also naming aside, for me I think Fender sounds cooler than mudguard, but you can call them whatever you want. This is a little fender guard that you can fit on the front of your fork and keeps a lot of muck away. But there's lots of brands that do really big guards, especially for your front fork, but you can get marsh guards or similar that will run on your rear frame as well. And I mean, the main advantage is you're not going to get covered in crud. So you're not going to run through like a huge puddle and then cover your eyes and face with mud and sheep poo and other general trail detritus that isn't there in the summer. Okay, this one, I said Fenders sounded dull, but maybe this one sounds even more dull, and that's just making sure you've got all the kit with you that you need. So make sure you've got all the necessary bike tools to fix your bike. Make sure you've got a spare mech hanger. Make sure you've got the right number of inner tubes, and if you're running an MX mixed wheel size, I mean, there's some tubes which you can stretch from 275 to 29. You can do a kind of like special trick where you slide a 29 tube into itself so it runs. So you don't necessarily have to have lots and lots of tubes, but make sure you've got some. Make sure you've got lots of tubeless worms as well. And it's imperative to have all this kit close to hand, because when it's cold, when it's wet, when it's getting darker, you don't want to be stuck on the side of a hill, faffing around for ages, getting colder and wetter, and it's getting darker. So don't become a statistic and get stuck on a mountain and have to walk off. Make sure you've got all the right kit that you need. And speaking of kit that you might need, a survival blanket, just the really super light ones, so it's a really good idea to put in like a basic first aid kit which you can put in your pack. They weigh next to nothing. If you've got one of those nice bikes that's got a down tube storage compartment like some of the Orbeyers say, it would easily live in there for an eternity. But if the worst happens and somebody injures themselves fairly seriously and needs a bit of a lie down for a bit, you'll be able to cover them with that and they'll stay warm. So yeah, make sure you've got all the kit that you need for you to stay warm, and then also for your mate Steve's bike when it breaks again. Now, I can't talk about winter riding without discussing, well, I've discussed loads of tech, haven't I? Which does make a difference, but I think the stuff that can make a really big difference is clothing and kit. So Anna's done a fantastic video on all the best tips that she's got about which are the best jackets or which hacks work best. Like when it's cold, when it's soggy, it's so much nicer to have good kit that it keeps you more comfortable, keeps you dry. Now, for me, it's a pair of merino socks and switching to flat pedals, because I think it's just really fun to slide around in the mud. Maybe that's just me. So what are your favourite tips to keep riding in winter? Okay, this is a nerdy tip, but I think it's a good one. So in the summer, you might be running a massive rotor. Okay, this one's only a 203, so there's bigger rotors out there. I'm suggesting that you try a smaller rotor. And that might be kind of a bit counterintuitive, because you think, oh, well, I'm on the brakes lots in the winter. And you might be, and your brakes might howl lots in the winter. Well, one thing that I've kind of read from quite a few sources and seen in the cyclocross world is running a smaller rotor can be an advantage, because in the winter, when it's colder and it's wetter, it's harder to get the rotor and the pads up to temperature. So running a smaller rotor means that, yeah, it will run hotter, but because the conditions are colder and there's lots of water splashing around, means that you probably won't get as much squeal, and hopefully you'll have great stopping because you're not having to wait for your brakes to heat up, get rid of all that excess water that's on the rotor surface, and you'll have great brakes. So as well as switching rotor size, I recommend switching to sintered pads. So if you're switching out rotors anyway, it'd be a good idea to switch to pads at the same time because you need to match your brake pad material to what the disc has been run on before. So you can't switch from resin to sintered or vice versa. You need to keep the rotors and pads matching together. And we've done a video on that previously. There's lots of science that Isaac goes into. But yeah, sintered pads are, I'm calling them sintered, other brands call them metal. Effectively, they're the kind of coppery coloured with a really high metal content. They have a different lever feel. They take longer to bed in, but they last a heck of a lot longer, especially when it's wet and especially when it's muddy and gritty. So yeah, it's a bit more expensive, but you'll save in the long run. So switch to a little rotor and switch to sintered. Okay, bear with me. This one's another slightly dull one, but it's another winter essential. This is a cute little headset bearing. It's had a tough life. Yours don't need to have that tough life. With really good assembly grease and some other greases, you need to grease your bearings. Anna's done a fantastic video on how to strip and grease. And key is this outer surface, yeah, it's nice to have a little bit of grease on, but the key bit is getting inside to those balls and making sure that all of that surface inside there is packed with grease, hopefully nice thick grease. Pop the seal back on, and that's twofold. A, it means that the bearing surfaces have got like a lovely slide layer to work efficiently. So if it's in your bottom bracket, you're gonna, not lose watts or kind of, lose anything in the pedaling process, and your steering will be nice and smooth, and your suspension should feel as supple as it should do when everything's properly greased. The other biggie for winter, that grease can easily wash out, and you can get grit in there, and you can get water in there, and you can get mud in there, and then quickly this lovely little bearing turns very crusty, and your suspension becomes indexed, your steering has kind of like fixed points, and your cranks don't go round. So a bit of preventative work of stripping down bearings and packing them with grease before winter happens is a great idea. So with all the other bearings I've talked about, essentially all of them have got nice little seals. Now there's one super important set of bearings on your bike that basically isn't sealed, and that's your chain. So each one of the rollers, which is the kind of section in between the inner links, effectively that's like a bearing, and that moves around with each pedal stroke. And that's why it's ultra important in winter to A, degrease your chain fully, and B, use a wet lube. Okay, this is the PTs, which is the one we use in the workshop. It's really good in the winter, and it's really good because it's really thick, it's really viscous, and it just stays put on that roller, even when it gets really wet and really soggy and really gritty. And that's the key bit, is not having the chain sort of dripping in lube, because all we need is lube to protect that roller that's just on the inside there from getting grit and mud inside it. So by using a nice thick wet lube, that stays in place and sort of seals that off, a bit like the rubber seals on a headset or bottom bracket bearing. So yeah, chains can get eaten alive in winter, but using a good wet lube will help you a lot. Okay, just to wrap it up, I think I've covered almost everything, but there's one thing that I think is really fun for winter, and that's a hardtail mountain bike. Blake's done an amazing video on them, on why he loves his hardtail, and I'm also a fan. I think they're brilliant. You often get more mud tyre clearance in the back. They're often a bit simpler, they're a bit easier to clean with less mud shelves, so they're just a bit better suited for the rough and tumble of boggy, muddy rides. I mean, that's my take. I mean, I also like single speed as well, because it's really almost as zero maintenance as you can get for a winter mountain bike, but it really depends on the terrain. That's my thoughts on how to winterize your mountain bike. What are yours? Put them in the comments below, and see you on the next video.